Getting feds protection after you've been sued is like putting body armor on a corpse. That is a great quote from my good friend John Adler when he was the president of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, which is the association representing the interest of more than 25,000 federal law enforcement officers. Hi, I'm Tony Vergnetti, the president and founder of FEDS. As a former federal employee of a federal law enforcement agency and an attorney who defended federal law enforcement officials in private practice, I concur with these statements made by John, as well as these three attorneys, John Euler, David Schertler, and Deborah Roth, who have represented federal employees for decades, that you have no idea how harsh, frightening, and financially devastating an allegation against you can be until you are in the eye of the storm. The good news is that you don't have to be vulnerable. Just 5 minutes, you'll understand your exposures and the protections available to you. In 10 minutes, you can have feds protection in place and peace of mind should the next allegation be made against you. Liability exposure for all federal employees really began back in June of 1971 with the Supreme Court decision that allowed 6 federal agents to be sued personally. So in response to this ruling, Congress enacted legislation requiring agencies to reimburse all federal law enforcement officers up to 1/2 of the cost of the professional liability insurance. Yes, folks, Congress stands behind the work you do for this country and wants you to be protected even when the agency's interests in a particular situation don't necessarily align with your own, resulting in the need for you to have your own legal representation. So this is an employee benefit that you really ought to be taking advantage of. It's been my experience both in federal law enforcement and in defending federal officers for over 20+ years that law enforcement officers have the most exposure administratively, civilly, and criminally. And in my opinion, the reason you have this increased vulnerability compared to other federal employees is because what I like to call these 3 toys: the gun, the badge, and the car. Very often, your personal and financial liability exposures are somehow related to these 3. Particularly with the badge, you have a huge amount of authority and power as a federal law enforcement officer. So with that power, essentially comes increased scrutiny. It is only natural. Law enforcement officers are the federal employees, a group of federal employees that are most susceptible to civil lawsuits, even if it's clear that you are acting within the scope of your employment. So you don't have absolute immunity for these personal capacity lawsuits like you do for lawsuits under the Federal Tort Claims Act. So the Fed's policy will pay a judgment entered against you for one of these kinds of lawsuits if you are found liable up to the $1 or $2 million limit, depending upon which policy you choose. More importantly, a Fed's policy will appoint and pay for your legal counsel if DOJ exercises its discretion and declines to represent you. And that most often happens if you are being, say, sued if you're being investigated for misconduct for the very same reason that you are being sued. DOJ will not want to be on both sides of that. So again, the policy pays damages and defends when DOJ declines. The next coverage area I want to talk about is administrative and disciplinary. For these administrative matters, you would be assigned an attorney to represent you throughout any investigation and defend you in any resulting personnel action taken against you. Today's scrutiny of law enforcement makes it highly unlikely that you will complete your career without facing an allegation of wrongdoing, whether it's a minor allegation stemming from use of a GOV or other equipment, treatment of a subject or witness, or more seriously, one surrounding your handling of a law enforcement operation. You will simply be shocked at the level of scrutiny you'll be subjected to by your agency when these allegations give rise. And when that happens, you don't want to be this guy. A retired attorney and former AUSA by the name of Tom Roth once said, "Big cases, big problems. Little cases, little problems." And it is often what that means. It is often the most aggressive and most productive and most capable agents who get ground up in the disciplinary machinery of their respective agencies. As an attorney who has represented federal agents for over 20 plus years, I couldn't agree more. Furthermore, any sort of operation resulting in injury, death, terrorism vulnerability, security breach, media sensation, negative public impact, political agendas, all will have increased scrutiny. And when that happens, you may realize that your exemplary record of performance and achievement may not count for as much as you think. Lastly, feds will provide legal defense for your criminal exposures. Now, I know most of federal employees, and certainly my law enforcement agents, did not come to work intending on committing a crime. But you have to understand that there is very little you can do wrong in the federal government and not have it also be a violation of Title 18, which, as we all know, is a criminal code. Some of the most common criminal investigations involving a federal law enforcement officer usually involve inaccurate information in an investigative document or court testimony, release of Privacy Act or other statutory protected information, or really anything arising out of an alleged misuse of position or authority. And because of the enormous amount of power that you have as a federal agent, like I talked about earlier, these entities that will be prosecuting and investigating you tend to want to make example out of federal law enforcement officers in an effort to set an example for the rest of the government. So it does happen, no matter how good of an agent or an officer that you are. I want to mention that FEDS is additionally endorsed and recommended by the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, and that we work collaboratively with them to provide you comprehensive legal services that you need as a federal agent or law enforcement officer. There are huge benefits to being members of both, and we really recommend that you're members of both FEDS and FLEOA. And I should also mention that FLEOA members get a discount on their premium with us. So this slide basically just summarizes the three basic coverage areas. But what I really want to talk about is cost. So for only $290 annually or $145 after the agency reimbursement, FEDS Protection provides coverage for these administrative, civil, and criminal exposures. Talk to your HR representative or contact us for more information on the reimbursement process. I also want to mention that FEDS offers payroll deduction, which starts at about $12 a pay period, if that is your preferred payment method. We also have optional LEOSA coverage, the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act coverage. FEDS optional LEOSA coverage fills the LEOSA civil exposure gaps similar to your on-duty civil liability gaps. The FEDS LEOSA coverage will provide protection for justified LEOSA acts irrespective of Department of Justice's scope determination. So just so we're clear, coverage applies whether you're using your duty-issued weapon or your own personal weapon, just so long as it is not an excluded weapon under LEOSA. The hardest phone calls we receive are those from employees who don't have FEDS protection in place because they never, ever thought they would need an insurance policy to pay for an attorney to defend a job-related action or decision. Can't emphasize this point enough. It needs to be in place before, not after, your house is on fire. It takes less than 5 minutes to get enrolled, and we have payroll deduction available, as I've mentioned. So please contact us either through online at www.fedsprotection.com or give us a call at 866-955-FEDS and get enrolled today.